Time for the final conference tournament prediction video of the Full Court Trap podcast series, going through all the Power 5 conferences, and we're closing it out with what's been the best conference in college basketball all season long, the Southeastern Conference. This one looks to be a absolutely loaded field. Going to be a lot to talk about here in terms of the various storylines. Auburn's coming into this tournament on a bit of a losing skid, seeing how they bounce back and respond to some adversity. Whole lot of great teams across the board: Alabama, Florida, Tennessee. I mean, the list goes on and on. Even the teams 5 through 8, really. I mean, so much quality across this conference. But let's get straight into the bracket and take a look at this thing. All right, Brandie, here's the bracket. All of its glory starting on Wednesday in Nashville at Bridgestone Arena. SEC, it's the most loaded conference in the country, like I said, and this promises to be an outstanding tournament. Looking at this thing through first glance, obviously 1 through 4, we've got Auburn, Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee, and then rounding out the rest of those teams in the bye spots, we've got Texas A&M at 5, Kentucky at 6, Missouri at 7, and Ole Miss at 8. But just looking at this thing right off rip, Brandie, what are some possible storylines we're looking out for here as this tournament develops? Some teams that are looking to make some noise for their tournament hopes. I know there's a couple of bubble teams in this conference that are looking to do some things to feel comfortable going into Selection Sunday. And then obviously the top dogs in this conference are looking to prove that they belong up there with the best of the best in the country. And I mean, there's no better way to do it than taking home a conference tournament championship in this loaded conference.
Yeah, I think some things that stick out is I think probably for the first time in a really long time, Ole Miss is not playing on a Wednesday. Really impressive year for Chris Beard in his second year at Ole Miss. But also Texas and Arkansas and Oklahoma and maybe even a little bit of Georgia. All of them are basically bubble teams or, right in the field or right outside of the field. So those teams need to win this tournament, I think, if they don't want to leave any questions outstanding on Selection Sunday. I think, namely, Texas would be a team that they're not going to – doesn't matter what they do in this tournament unless they win it, they're not going to get in. And I think Arkansas and Oklahoma are both more on the cusp than Georgia is. I think Georgia is probably in the field and just win the first game, and they're probably pretty good. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of bubble stories that are happening, which is crazy. I only mentioned 3 of them because all the other teams outside of South Carolina and LSU are in the field. So that's going to be wild to see how many SEC teams end up getting their names called on Selection Sunday. Something else I think that sticks out too is the possibility potentially of Auburn and Alabama meeting for the 3rd time in the championship game. And just a lot of revenge factors. Kentucky's on the same side of the bracket as Alabama, and they got swept by Alabama this year. So that's super interesting too. So yeah, I think those are the big things when I look at this that stands out. The bubble stories and just some teams who historically are not very good that have had good seasons out of this conference.
Yeah, you talk about revenge storylines. I mean, look at the first game of the tournament. We got South Carolina and Arkansas on Wednesday. Arkansas, I mean, they got boat raced at South Carolina, to put it nicely, and that was an awful performance for them. That's going to be an intriguing one. I expect Arkansas will take care of business. We'll talk about that as we start to fill this thing out. But yeah, the bubble teams, obviously, this is do or die time for Texas, Oklahoma, and like you said, a little bit of Georgia as well. Got to win a game or two here to feel good about yourself. Of these bubble teams, before I talk more about what I'm seeing here, which one do you think it's most imperative that they get a game or two under their belt in this tournament? Because I think it might be Texas, just because of the fact that Oklahoma did end the last week of the regular season with that win against Missouri, and then they obviously beat Texas as well. So I think they're in a little bit more favorable standing with the committee right now. Georgia, I think that they're probably on the good side of the bubble as well, but Texas, I feel like they're the team that maybe needs to get a game or two here to feel good.
Yeah. I think even if Texas gets a game or two, I don't think that they're going to make the tournament.
Yeah.
That's so because of that, I actually think I'm going to go Arkansas, because if they lose again to South Carolina, a loss there hurts them a lot. So I'm going to go Arkansas here simply because I think Texas has to win the whole thing if they want to get in. That's my personal opinion. I feel like the committee years and years and years have shown us that the SEC tournament just doesn't hold as much weight when it comes to teams who are on the bubble per se, when it comes to seed lines, bubble and seed lines. So yeah, I feel like the first round holds a lot more weight than, say, if Texas were to go all the way into the semifinals and then lose in the semifinals. But to me, the first round probably matters a lot more than anything after that, unless they're going to win it all. So I'm going to go Arkansas just because I think that a loss there can really hurt them since they already lost to South Carolina once this season.
Do you think that if Arkansas were to drop that game against South Carolina, does that just drop them out of the tournament completely? Because right now, they are on the last four byes territory, and they're close to that last four in mark as well. So I don't know if I would think that a loss to a team like that that's really not that quality whatsoever twice would be a real damper on what you've done. But at the same time, you got to consider the other quality wins that they've been able to stack as well. But I mean, even still, there are some other puzzling losses, like the one they lost early in conference play at LSU. So yeah, I think this is a very tricky spot if you're Arkansas that Coach Cal's going to have to navigate carefully.
Yeah, well, one, I think it depends on what happens in a lot of these mid-major conference tournaments that are going to have teams get selected no matter if they win their conference tournament or not. So thinking like WCC, Mountain West Conference, there's probably a couple other conferences out there too where there's a possibility of a bid stealer, and even in a Power 4 conference too, if you have a random team in the Big 12 or random team in the ACC like we saw last year with NC State go out and steal a bid who was nowhere near being in the tournament before that week. So one, I think it depends a lot on how many bid stealers we end up having, because there will be some, one, two, however many there is. There's definitely going to be one. And two, I think it's going to end up being Arkansas would be more of a play-in team than a last four bye, but I don't think a loss here would fully have them out of the tournament unless the number of bid stealers is very high. So I think that they're going to make the tournament, but you would much rather be in the field of 64 than in the field of 68. So
yeah, for sure. And then I guess, like you said as well, for other storylines, Ole Miss, I mean, that's very impressive for Chris Beard to have them in a single bye situation because we're not used to seeing them over there. And really, these teams, 5 through 7, those are all very quality teams. And to see them not make it into that double bye status, I mean, in years past, they may have been able to clinch a double bye in this conference, but that just shows how loaded this thing is as a whole. But I guess we'll not delay any longer. Let's get straight into some picks. We'll start it off. South Carolina and Arkansas. Do we think that the Hogs get their revenge against the Gamecocks?
Man, this is a tough one because South Carolina didn't just beat Arkansas. Like they flat
beat
out
them down.
they flat out embarrassed them. But also South Carolina, their other win is Texas in the SEC. That's the only 2 conference games they won, was a beatdown over Texas and a beatdown over Arkansas. But all their other conference losses, for the most part, outside of when they played a couple of teams like Kentucky and I think Florida, and Mississippi State, like they really have had some really close games against decent teams. Like they took Mississippi State to overtime earlier this season, and they had a 3-point loss to Vanderbilt on the road, a 3-point loss at home to Auburn. They had a 1-point loss to Florida. Like the teams I'm naming are really good teams in this conference that they had almost wins over, and I get that almost wins or not wins. But the South Carolina team is slightly better than what their record says. I think I might go with South Carolina here.
You're picking the upset. Oh, my
I think
goodness.
I'm going to have to pick the upset here because Coach Calipari was on record today basically saying he's never cared about the SEC tournament, and I just don't find that very inspiring. I don't know, maybe the players like aren't reading too much into like a quote he said to the media. I don't know what he's saying in his locker room, but I'm a little like uninspired. And I actually like Cal. I have nothing against him, but I think I got to go with South Carolina here. They have nothing to lose, like literally nothing to play for. They're not on the bubble. They're out of the tournament. They're just here to like have fun and maybe get an upset.
Yeah. I mean, you said Cal's quotes about the SEC tournament. It's uninspiring. I mean, as somebody who's been a fan of this program for about the last 4 years, this isn't the first time Cal has said something about the SEC tournament not mattering. He has a track record of saying that this doesn't matter. He views this, as he's always said, as a chance to upgrade your seed in the tournament that actually matters. But I mean, Cal, in a situation like this where you're firmly on the bubble, you got to lock in and get this win against South Carolina. Like, this is not a game you can drop, because if the committee looks on Selection Sunday and they see that you've dropped a game to South Carolina twice, that's going to be a big resume stain. And I mean, I know they've done a lot to put themselves back in the good graces of the committee, but at the same time, like, you got to take into account possible bid stealers and other external factors that are going to be able to go against them. And it just really sets up what could be a tricky situation for them that they don't want to find themselves in as we head into Selection Sunday. And gosh, we're going to be using the trump card so early in this one as compared to the Big 12 video. I've got Arkansas, but if you want to go ahead and force South Carolina through, I am not stopping you.
No, I won't use it this early, not on a 16 seed South Carolina.
Okay, well, we are going Woo Pig Suey by default. Brandie has made it known that she thinks the Gamecocks get a big-time upset. And, yeah, I mean, I don't really necessarily think you're crazy in saying that South Carolina could win, because I mean, we saw they put a beat down on Arkansas. It's not out of the realm of possibility that they could go out and win this one again. But I think that Arkansas, you've got a team that's playing for their tournament lives and then another team that's playing with nothing to lose. I kind of wonder just how bought in South Carolina really is heading into this game. Whereas Coach Cal, I mean, yeah, he's saying that this doesn't matter overall, but you have to imagine he's at least saying something like, guys, we got to get a win or two to feel good about ourselves heading into Selection Sunday. So I think that they at least get one. Now, this Ole Miss matchup that we'll talk about getting in the second round, who knows? That could be a completely different story. But moving on through the bracket, the second game of the first round, Texas versus Vanderbilt. This is an intriguing one, Brandie. I mean, you mentioned that Texas, they really have to go on a big run, if not win this whole tournament, to get their name called on Selection Sunday. Do we think they started off with the win against the Commodores?
No, I don't. Texas has been a tough watch this season, to put it lightly. And they have some issues on offense that are scheme issues that I don't think that are just fixed overnight. And how much more juice does Trey Johnson have in him to continue carrying this team on his back? I don't know. But I like this Vanderbilt squad. I know they're coming off 2 losses right now to Arkansas and to Georgia. But they're scrappy, and it's a hometown team. So this tournament's being played in Nashville. And this is the first season that Vanderbilt has had in a while where their fans are actually bought into this team. They've been packing out Memorial all season because of it. And I just think that they're going to have a better outing from a fan perspective that they haven't had in a really long time in Nashville. I've gone to the SEC tournament for like 6 or 7 years in a row now. And even though Vanderbilt's playing and in it, you just don't see a ton of their fans still there. I think that changes this time around. I think that they're going to have a little bit of a home crowd advantage in this game. And I like Jason Edwards, and he was able to feast against them in the game they played earlier this season. Texas does have a little bit of more length on Vanderbilt, as most teams in the conference do, but that hasn't really stopped this Vanderbilt team from being able to win games against teams that outsize them and outmatch them. I think Missouri, when they beat them earlier this season, or a weekend ago, like, that's a big mismatch for them, but they were somehow able to pull that win out. And I think Vanderbilt's going to keep pulling those scrappy wins out the way that they have this season. So go on the Commodores.
Yeah, we're going to agree with this one here. I mean, Trey Johnson, he's only going to be able to take this Texas team so far. I feel bad for him because he really has been a terrific freshman, and he's had an amazing season, just got named the Conference Freshman of the Year today. But Vandy, I mean, they're the better team all around. I do think that their fans might be a little bit more bought in than in years past. I've been to the SEC tournament the last 2 years, not as long as you have, but in 2023, when they started that little run they had where they won a couple of games, they beat Kentucky, their fans showed up the next day after that game against Kentucky. So if the fan base is bought in, they will show up, and I think they will in this scenario, just because Vandy looks to be a surefire tournament team right now. And a bigger question I have when it comes to Texas, is this going to be it for Rodney Terry?
I think so. I think it makes sense to move on from him at this point. I think it was great that they were able to slot him in right after everything that happened with Beard, but there are better coaching options out there, and I just don't think that he's the answer from a scheme perspective in this modern era of basketball. Unfortunately, I like him as a person, but
Yeah.
I don't think he's the answer. Um, this team, I think, actually would have been a lot better if he found a way to get Dylan Mitchell to stay on it. Yeah, I think it's time to move on for them, especially now that they're in the SEC.
Simple enough. Moving it on. LSU versus Mississippi State. I'm going to keep this one short but sweet, Brandie. I think Mississippi State cruises in this one.
I do too. And even though it's a 15-10 matchup, like I think this is going to be the most boring matchup out of all of these games.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some fun offense from Mississippi State. LSU might be able to score because that Mississippi State defense hasn't looked the best lately. But I agree. I think Mississippi State cruises to a win in this one.
And it's really crazy that Mississippi State, I mean, this was a team that was in the top 25 just a week ago. They're a borderline ranked team right now, and they're playing it Wednesday in the SEC tournament as a 10 seed. I mean, that just baffles me completely with how deep this conference is.
Right. That's crazy.
It's incredible to think about. And I mean, Mississippi State, if Josh Hubbard gets hot and that whole team plays the way that they did kind of earlier in conference play, I mean, there's no reason that they couldn't go on a run. I mean, Missouri, we'll talk about their matchup there in this hypothetical. You could see them getting that one, maybe even further. But this Mississippi State team for a 10 seed that's playing on a Wednesday, they're very talented, and I think that they're going to do well in that first matchup at least. LSU, very weak. Speaking of LSU, do you think it's the right decision to stay with Matt McMahon for another year, as they've already stated they're going to do?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm mixed feelings on that as somebody who's a big John Moran fan, and McMahon was his coach when he was at Murray State. This will be the first season, I think not this year, but going into next season will be the first season that LSU doesn't have a scholarship limitation from everything that happened with Will Wade. So maybe, and they've said that they're backing him from an NIL perspective. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. I want to say no,
but also like maybe they're just waiting to like bring Will Wade back home eventually. I don't know.
You never know, but that would be a storyline of all storylines when it comes to the coaching carousel, to see him end up back there. But not going to happen this year because it looks like they're sticking with their guns for now. But moving forward, Oklahoma and Georgia. I think that this is low-key the most intriguing matchup of the first round, Oklahoma and Georgia. Oklahoma, I mean, Jeremiah Fears, obviously he's a stud. He's been carrying that Oklahoma team as they fight to get into the tournament. And then Georgia, they've got another star-studded freshman right across from Jeremiah Fears in the paint over there with Asa Newell. So this is a very interesting spot here. And Oklahoma, I think they need this win more than Georgia does when it comes to tournament hopes. And me personally, I think Oklahoma's going to get it. I don't know what you think, Brandie, but I think Jeremiah Fears shows out and has a good game to move them into that spot against my Cats in the next round.
I really like Georgia in this spot.
Really?
Georgia's on a 4-game win streak that got sparked by a crazy upset win over Florida that essentially propelled them to getting locked into the field. And I just feel like they're playing with a chip on their shoulder since that, for whatever reason. And Asa Newell was kind of snubbed from getting on first, second, or third All-SEC team that just got announced today. So I feel like he's definitely going to be playing with a little bit of chip on his shoulder because of that. And I do think Trey Johnson deserved Freshman of the Year, but I mean, Asa Newell is going to be a lottery pick too, and I get he made all SEC freshman team, but I don't know. This Georgia team I think is playing with a little bit more fire in them right now, and I really like how Silas Demery is playing in their guard room too. He's really stepped it up as of late. I know Oklahoma's on a 2-game win streak over Missouri and Texas, but there's just something I like about this Georgia team right now that I think that they're going to take this one from Oklahoma. Yeah, I think that they're a pretty big size advantage over Oklahoma too. They're just so much more athletic than them. I think that Oklahoma is really going to struggle inside to be able to score there. They have a great guard room, but I feel like or a good guard room, but I feel like they're going to struggle to score inside, and the shots aren't falling. It's not ideal.
Yeah, okay, so we're split on this one. I'm not going to use my trump card. I'll let you take Georgia into the next round. So we'll move them on in, and we'll get started with the second round here. Brandie, talk to the people about Arkansas Ole Miss while I roll over here and get my laptop charger real quick.
Yeah, Arkansas and Ole Miss is going to be kind of a fun matchup. Ole Miss has kind of been all over the place lately. I was like, they're not playing their best ball in the last couple of weeks, I feel like, but they did have a very exciting win over Tennessee. They stormed the court, got to 20 wins. It's really impressive job that Chris Beard has done there in his second year. And Ole Miss is going to be playing fresh legs. Arkansas is going to be coming off of a game, and Arkansas is a tad depleted. So they have 7 scholarship players available right now, and they're just getting dragged through the injury bug after injury bug. So it's an intriguing matchup, but I don't see Arkansas just having enough juice. They've had to kind of utilize energy and juice to get through the end of their conference schedule to essentially propel them into the field. And I just don't see the juice taking them enough in this game. And also on Ole Miss's team, you have somebody on their team who's from Nashville, maybe playing in front of a home crowd there. Their backup or their starting center, Malik Diaz. So he had a really great game when he returned home against Vanderbilt, his former school. So maybe a little bit of motivation there. I do think Arkansas will have a good crowd, though. Arkansas, no matter how bad they are, because even last year when Arkansas was playing on Wednesday last year, and we're not going to make the tournament
that game.
or in the bubble at all, there are still a lot of Arkansas fans that show up to the games in Nashville. It's not that far away from Arkansas, I guess, and they just have a really large fan base that travels well. So with it being Cal's first time in the SEC tournament, maybe they want to show up and meet some Kentucky fans in person. I don't know, with the new rivalry that's been established there. They'll have fans there, but ultimately, I just don't know if they're gonna have enough juice to get past Ole Miss. I mean, to me, this is gonna be like Arkansas playing off pure adrenaline to get through. I feel like.
Yeah, I agree here. I think I'm taking Ole Miss. I didn't really see the vision for the upset, or not the upset, for them getting beat by South Carolina, but I do see them flaming out here if they do make it past South Carolina. Ole Miss is just the better team. Cal, I mean, is he bought in on the SEC tournament? Do they get a win? Feel comfortable about how they sit going into Selection Sunday and just say, all right, you know what, let's just roll the ball out there and see what happens from here. So Ole Miss, more talented as well. So I think that they get it done here and they go into that matchup against Auburn. And like you said about Arkansas fans and them traveling, I remember that game last year between them and Vandy that went to overtime off was it an Ezra Mignon buzzer beater? I think it was.
Yeah, I was at that game. It was crazy.
Yeah, I was there too. That game was unbelievable for a general admission Wednesday night game. And you're not lying, the Arkansas fans did show up there and they ultimately got that one done. But yeah, speaking just to this year, I don't think they get past Ole Miss. So moving on, Vandy and Texas A&M. Now Vandy, we saw them go on the road to College Station just a few weeks ago and get this one done. Now we're playing on a neutral court, Brandie. What happens this time around?
I actually like Vanderbilt to go on a little bit of a run here.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
Texas A&M, before they got the win over Auburn, was not playing good basketball. They were on a 4-game losing streak. Mississippi State, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Florida. I get that. I just said 2 of the top teams in the SEC and Tennessee and Florida, but that was a little bit of a concern to me. And that game against Mississippi State that started it, they got blown out by them. And A&M plays a really scrappy and annoying style of basketball that really can take some teams over. But if you're a well-composed team that doesn't really care about that and you just play basketball, then I feel like it's kind of easy to beat Texas A&M at times. They have a great defense, and I think Solomon Washington is a great defender for A&M. But Wade Taylor doesn't have enough offense in him, enough shots in him made, in my opinion, to be able to take this Texas A&M team to this win over Vanderbilt. Because Vanderbilt can shoot the ball from 3, and Texas A&M can sometimes. They did against Auburn, but not always.
I'm glad we're on the same page here because I might have had to force Vandy through. I really like this spot for them. I don't know why. I guess it's just the way that I saw them really control that game in College Station, and I feel like with a neutral crowd behind them, and I mean Vandy fans, I'm sure they'll show up for this game against Texas A&M. You're going against a top 5 seed in the tournament. I mean, it's time to show up and show out and get behind the Commodores and Mark Byington. I mean, I just think this is a good spot for them. I could see them easily taking this one. Now, Texas A&M, if they play to the best of their ability, and Wade Taylor has a Wade Taylor in Nashville performance like we saw last year when they pulled that upset against Kentucky, and I was sitting there watching in pain and agony. Now they could move on to the next round and take on Tennessee, but yeah, I just think that the blueprint's kind of clear on how to take out this Texas A&M team, and I think Vandy can kind of exploit that. So we'll see how this Vandy dialogue progresses as we get throughout the video here. Maybe another upset in them. We'll see. But moving on.
Yeah, we're going against a little bit of a trend here for A&M too. In the last 3 SEC tournaments, Texas A&M has made it to either the semifinals or further. So they somehow have had really weird, oddly good runs, little mini runs.
Mm-hmm.
Never won the whole thing, but yeah.
Yeah, no, they tend to show up in Nashville for some reason, but I think Vandy's going to stop that this time and moving on over to Mississippi State, the 10 seed versus Missouri, the 7. This is another intriguing matchup, I think, Brandie. Mississippi State versus Missouri. I really like Mississippi State still. I know they've had their struggles recently. They got booted out of the top 25 after a rough last couple of games. And Missouri, they're coming off a loss against Kentucky. So what do we think about the Bulldogs versus the Tigers in this spot?
I don't think that this is going to be a fun game for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because I feel like both teams are just trending in the wrong direction. Missouri's on a 3-game losing streak. Mississippi State's on a 2-game losing streak. And they've lost 2 out of their last 5. 4 out of their last 5. The only one was like over LSU in that stretch. Just this Mississippi State guard room is so hot and cold. You just don't know. And I feel like they're going to only go as far as Josh Hubbard will allow them to go. And I almost want to compare Josh Hubbard to Wade Taylor a little bit. I really liked him his freshman year, but I feel like this year he has been forced to play more of like a high volume 3-point shooting role that isn't conducive to his style per se. Obviously, he was probably going to see some regression from an insane freshman year that he had. But I don't know. I think I want to go Missouri here from the sole fact that they're the lengthiest team in the conference. And I don't think that Mississippi State will have an answer for them inside the paint. And Caleb Grill is still playing great basketball. So I'm going to go with Missouri here, I think. Yeah, I'm going to go with Missouri.
We're split. I kind of think Mississippi State gets this one. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I feel like Josh Hubbard, like you said, they're going to kind of go as he takes them. And I just feel like this is a spot where he can kind of get things going and maybe they pull off the upset here. But I believe the trump card is back in your hands. So if you want to go ahead and move Missouri on, we'll go ahead and pencil them into the next round.
I'm not going to because I don't love either of these teams right now.
Okay.
So I'm not going to use it yet. I'm not super bought into either of them. So yeah.
This is kind of a battle of regressing teams, so it's kind of hard to get super psyched about either of them. I see where you're coming from. I just feel like if Mississippi State gets hot, I mean, Josh Hubbard, obviously, but then you got a guy like Claudell Harris. He can make shots too. Cameron Matthews, he's been decent at times in the paint for them as well. And in Nwoku, I mean, there's pieces on that team that make them very capable of beating a team like Missouri. It may not be the most exciting matchup. I do think it brings some intrigue, though. So we'll see what happens. We'll move Mississippi State on for the sake of the video. Closing out the second round, Georgia and Kentucky, a rematch of the matchup in January where my Cats went down on the road in Athens. It was a bit of a free throw battle. The Bulldogs, I think, eclipsed about the 30 free throw attempt mark in that game. I don't know if it's going to be that gritty and grinded out this time around. And I think Kentucky's in a good spot for a revenge game here, Brandie.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think Georgia's going to be able to get away with some of the physicality that they were able to get away with in that first matchup either. And Kentucky's playing good basketball. I think that loss to Auburn really fired them up. They had a really good outing against a good Missouri squad on Saturday, and the score looks honestly closer than what most of the game felt like. And Lamont's healthy. So yeah, I like Kentucky here.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be hard for Georgia to play the game at that style that they did originally, especially because they're going to be a neutral setting. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, Nashville, Kentucky fans, they show up and they show out for that tournament every single year. We were talking about this before we even turned the cameras on. Kentucky fans, they're going to take up a lot of those tickets, and so are these other fan bases as well. Auburn, they travel exceptionally well. Florida and Tennessee too, but Kentucky, I mean, I think they may have the most well-traveled fan base of all these schools that come to Nashville. I obviously I have a little bit of bias, but I mean, just judging off of what I've seen. And
No, they
you put
absolutely do.
yeah, I was gonna say I don't
Literally,
want to.
Broadway is
Yeah,
a sea of blue
yeah, I
during
was
this
gonna
week.
say
So
I don't want to ride the bias train by any means. So, but yeah, Kentucky fans, this is a big deal for them, especially just speaking as someone who's from the state. It's a chance for those people that are in the different parts of the state. They're a little bit more close to Nashville than they are to Lexington. For some people, this is their opportunity to go see Kentucky play. So, I mean, they show up for this, and I think that it's going to be a hard environment for Georgia to overcome. And Kentucky's playing good basketball right now. Obviously, Jackson Robinson and Kirk Reeser are done. But Brandie, I guess this is kind of a long-term question when it comes to Kentucky, but we see obviously we have a sample size now of about 2 games with LSU, Missouri, of what life looks like post Jackson Robinson. They've been without Kirk Reeser for a while. What do you think about Kentucky as we move on into the tournament? Because they've been kind of a hot topic for a lot of college basketball people right now. It's hard to judge what exactly they're capable of with all the injuries in play, but they're more than capable of being able to be a team to watch for as we get into the SEC tournament and even beyond.
yeah, worry a little bit about depth with
Mm-hmm.
them since no Jackson Robinson. I mean, it's all going to depend on matchup, but Kentucky's a 3 seed, and it's probably what they're going to stay, which is a super favorable seed, and a line you definitely want to be on if you can be. So I think it just is going to depend on their matchup. If they match up against a super aggressive defensive team, I'm not entirely sure I would pick them. But if they match up against a team like, let's say, at Alabama, even though they got swept by Alabama, they're not going to find a better offensive team, probably, at least from like a tempo and just volume threes, like that type of offense. I think they have a better shot against a team like that than they do a team that's, I don't know, like St. John's style, who
Mm-hmm.
just owns possessions. Like Kentucky's not going to be able to beat a team like that, in my opinion, in the tournament. So it's really going to depend on matchups here. Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. If are they going to
Yeah.
get somebody that plays no defense? If so, like they can cook on offense and make a little run.
I have a little bit of Cal PTSD, but I am still worried about the first round of the NCAA tournament when it comes to this team because if we get the wrong mid-major with the defensive lapses that Kentucky's had at times, it's a little bit worrisome. But they have been improving lately, to their credit. In all metrics, they've moved up a lot. But you hinted at Kentucky, Alabama being a favorable matchup for them. We're going to get to that here in a little bit. But getting over to your Auburn Tigers, their debut game in the quarterfinals, we've got them going up against the Ole Miss Rebels. Do we expect Auburn to handle their business after this losing skid they closed out the regular season with? Because I'll just say it right now, and then I'll let you cook because I know you've got some thoughts about Auburn post all of the recent events. I think Auburn cruises in this game.
Yeah, it's tough to beat a team 3 times in a season. Auburn already beat Ole Miss twice, but one of those wins was a 30-point win. That's not a fluke. So gonna go with Auburn here. Obviously a little biased, but it is a little concerning ending the season on a 2-loss losing streak. The first time Auburn's lost back-to-back games all season long. That Texas A&M game, we were without our best on-ball defender and our starting point guard in Denver Jones, and Buzz Williams is now, I think he's now 6-2 or something like that against Bruce Pearl all time. So I can live with the Texas A&M loss. The loss on Saturday to Alabama was concerning from just a defensive standpoint from the most part. In the last 2 games, we talked about this yesterday when we listened to Eyes on College Basketball, but they've had a defensive efficiency of 188 in those 2 games in the entire
Mm-hmm.
country. And that's concerning, but all that to say, this team needed something to fire them up, and I don't think a loss to Texas A&M after winning on a short turnaround, short rest after winning the SEC fired them up that much. Getting a buzzer beater on your home court to your biggest rival in a year that you win the SEC in a game that really, doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but nothing matters more than pride, right? So that should fire them up. They should be pissed off. They should be playing with a chip on their shoulder. They're not the number one team in the country now. And even though we should still be the number one overall, Auburn should still be the number one overall seed, there is a possibility that if we lose the first game and Duke goes on to win the ACC tournament, that Duke gets the number one overall seed, or if Houston goes on to win the Big 12 tournament, that they get the number one overall seed. So Auburn has to win this game if they want to bring momentum into March and are serious about winning.
Yeah, this is definitely a must-win spot for Auburn. I mean, I think they get it done, and hopefully they've learned from everything that's going on. Hopefully Chad Baker-Mazara doesn't throw any more people's elbows at the head of opponents. I know we were talking a little bit about that. Yeah, no comment for Brandie on that one. She's got some frustration built up. But moving on, we got Vandy and Tennessee. Now, Brandie, this is a matchup I want to see happen. I picked Vandy, obviously, because I think they can beat Texas A&M again, but also partially because I want to see this battle of the two Tennessee schools again. I mean, Vandy beat them in Memorial, Tennessee beat them at Rocky Top. Here's the ultimate rubber match in the SEC tournament, best of three. Who comes out on top?
Yeah, Vandy is going to be having played back-to-back games since Wednesday. I think I got to go Tennessee here. A little bit of revenge from earlier in the season. From the game that Tennessee lost in Nashville. But I don't know, though, because Vandy almost beat them on the road in Knoxville later in the season.
Close.
This might, Vandy might end up being Tennessee's kryptonite this season. I will say there's going to be more Tennessee fans there. There's just naturally more Tennessee fans than there are Vanderbilt fans.
100%.
If we get this matchup, though, the place is going to be packed and rocking. I think it's going to be really fun just to have both fan bases there. I don't know.
It's a tough pick. It's an underrated tough pick. You want me to give mine first?
Yeah, you give yours first, so I can either disagree or.
Anchor down, baby. Give me the doors in an upset.
Okay. All right, we're just gonna roll with it because I don't want to trump. Oh my gosh, sorry, my dog. Come here.
We got a dog appearance on the podcast.
I'm not gonna trump that because Tennessee, historically, I feel like just doesn't do that well in this tournament for whatever reason, and you never want to use years past or whatever, but they oddly just don't do that well in this tournament for I don't know why. And I don't know. There's just something about their offense that's missing. And if Tyler Nickel and Jason Edwards are both clicking, it could be over with for Tennessee. So yeah.
So you're picking Tennessee. Okay.
I would have picked Tennessee, but you picked Vandy, so I'm not gonna trump it. I'm gonna we're gonna go with
All right. I like that. I feel confident about my Vandy Cinderella around here. I hope they don't let me down. Don't make me look stupid, and do not let the Tennessee fans find us if they do end up choking this. Okay, moving forward, Mississippi State versus Florida in the quarterfinals. I'm going to be honest here. I think Florida cruises if this is the game they get.
I do too. I think it doesn't matter if it's Missouri or Mississippi State or LSU, which is not going to be LSU, but I don't think it matters. I think Florida cruises. This Florida team is really special. They, to me, have. Oh my gosh. Sorry, 1 second.
Oh, you're good. It would be something if we got a Missouri-Florida rematch, though. I will say that.
Yeah, that would be wild. And Florida may be out for revenge then. But I think it doesn't matter, honestly, who gets this one. Because this Florida team is, they're clicking on everything right now. That performance against Alabama was so special. They just threw punches after punches back at them. And I thought that Alabama was going to take over. Oh, my gosh. And yeah, to me, it's hard to find. Maybe their defense a little bit, but to me, it's hard to find a weakness right now with this Florida team. They're that good to me.
I think they're playing probably, if not, I think it's Duke and Florida for 1A and 1B, and who's the best in the country right now, with Auburn very close behind. I mean, if Auburn wasn't on the losing skid, I'd say they're definitely still the best, but Florida, they've been on a heater lately, and it's hard to bet against them, really, against any team they're playing in this tournament. But Auburn, I think, would probably stand the best chance, and we're setting things up maybe to see that. But moving on throughout the quarterfinals into the last matchup, Kentucky versus Alabama. Brandie, it's hard to beat a team 3 times. Does Alabama sweep Kentucky on the year?
Oh man. This I think is a really intriguing matchup because just two offenses that when they're clicking, like very hard to stop them and win games. Alabama like had a little bit of a skid in their back-to-back losses against Auburn and then Missouri, and then they lost to Tennessee and then lost to Florida. I think they had a win mixed in there, but then they just beat Auburn. So given those are really tough teams that I just mentioned, all very great teams that none of which are playing on the first round of the SEC, so it's not like they have any bad losses. Um, I don't know. This to me is tough because Kentucky's still banged up and has a depth issue, I think. But it is hard to beat a team 3 times. And I don't know. I think I still have to go Alabama here. I just don't know if Kentucky has enough juice in them to beat this high-powered offense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough because beating a team 3 times is really hard. I will say that. And these are two teams that really stylistically kind of match up against each other, band for band. Two high-powered offenses, and there's a part of me that just thinks Kentucky digs deep and gets this win. I feel like they're going to have some pride playing in this matchup. They don't want to get swept a clean 3-0. And I may be a homer here, but I think Kentucky finds a way. I don't know. I trump Vandy through. So if you want to send Alabama on through, I'm not going to be mad at the pick. But I think there's a scenario where Kentucky comes away with this.
I'm not about to use a trump card to send Alabama through. So as an Auburn fan, I can't do that
Okay.
from a biased
Okay.
perspective.
Okay. We'll put the Cats through then. That's all right. This bracket would be a little bit chaotic, honestly. You got Tennessee going out, you got Bama going out.
Yeah, I don't know what we're coming up with here, but we're rocking with it.
Hey, this conference has been a absolute war all season long, so I don't think
I
it's
know.
irrational to say this. God, I'm still mulling over this Kentucky Bama game. I really think it is going to be hard for Bama to beat them 3 times, but
I could see
yeah,
it really like
I
if
it's such a
all
tough
it
call.
takes is all it takes is one of them to have a bad shooting night, which just happens, like not because a team was necessarily better than another team that day. Like sometimes shooting variances just happen. And if that happens to either Kentucky or Alabama in this tournament or in March, like it's tough to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
So
you mentioned the depth issue too with Kentucky. That is a problem. But I will say that Colin Chandler, Travis Perry, and Trent Noah, they've started to take steps forward in a positive direction in their elevated role. I mean, Colin Chandler, he just had a really good performance against Missouri, and he started to piece together some decent performances. So if those guys can be serviceable in the absence of a Jackson Robinson, and then you have Kobe Brea, if he starts to become more of a focal point of the offense, I think that Kentucky could possibly make some noise. Otega away, he's been Mr. Consistent all season long. And Andrew Carr versus Amari Williams, I don't know about you, but I kind of favor them when it comes to the front court matchup against Alabama because Andrew Carr on the last matchup against Alabama on the road, he kind of got what he wanted against Grant Nelson. Amari didn't have a bad game either.
yeah, and Grant's coming off the best, well, arguably one of the best games of his career against Auburn. I just don't see him having that type of game again. Um, at least not until maybe the actual NCAA tournament. So Amari's a really good. I was really impressed, at least for what I could watch of that Auburn Kentucky game for how he played against Janai. So yeah, I think inside it just depends too how much Alabama decides to involve Aiden Terrell because I thought he played really well against Auburn on Saturday and
Mm-hmm.
he has so much, he's still raw, but he has so much potential and he is kind of a little bit of a force inside. So yeah, I don't know. It would just, I think, depend a little bit on the game plan that Alabama comes in with, because
Yeah.
sometimes their defensive game plans can really just like shoot themselves in the foot. So
I think Alabama has a clear advantage when it comes to the guys like Mark Sears, LeBaron Philon. I think Aiden Holloway, too, coming off the bench compared to like a Travis Perry, that's a mismatch as well. But there's just something that's pulling me towards the Kentucky win here. And it's not even really the fact that I'm a fan. That factor of just, it's really hard to get a team 3 times. It's just really just tough to do. And I mean, we saw it with our teams too, Auburn and Kentucky. You remember back in 2018, 2019, we got you all twice. And then in the NCAA tournament, you got us on that third time. So it's
I
a
know,
real thing. Yeah,
It is.
I'm not making this up here, but for the sake of the video, we'll send Kentucky through. That makes our semifinal matchup the first one, Auburn Vandy. I'll go ahead and say it. Vandy Cinderella run comes to an end here, but if they make it that far, which I think they're capable of doing, I really do think they have a favorable path. The hell of a job for Mark Byington.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with Auburn here too. We just match up so well inside against this team, and we've had a bunch of mismatches lately. It feels like inside against Texas A&M and Kentucky and some other teams. But when we have those games where we don't have a mismatch inside, Janai just plays some of his best basketball. And I think our guard room may be a little too much. Auburn's guard room may be a little too much to overcome for Vanderbilt after having to play 3 games back to back to back. So
Yeah. And I will say, too, even if you all were to get Tennessee, I still like you guys against Tennessee, hypothetically. I don't know about you. I mean, we saw the absolute rock fight that it was in the jungle the first time around. But if that rematch were to happen, I still think I favor you all if Tennessee's the team that makes it through.
yeah, I think I probably would there too. Gosh, there's just something I don't like about this Tennessee team. I don't know what it is, but
What I think it is, honestly, it's just the fact that when they're rolling, like when Chaz Lanier's getting buckets and Zakai Ziegler's running things and getting plays on the defensive end, you got Igor Milicic who can stretch the floor and get to the paint. They're a good team, but at the same time, if Chaz Lanier, who tends to be the focal point of that offense, if he doesn't have things going, it can be tough for them to generate offense. Because I don't know about you, but Zakai Ziegler trying to be your shot creator, he's a phenomenal player, just on the floor general side of things, playmaking defensively. But he's not really the best sharpshooter and shot creator. So I think that might kind of be kind of the core of their issues that I think you might be a little bit hesitant of. At least that's my thought process. I don't know about you, but
yeah, I think that's what it is too. And you don't even need a Dalton Connect to like be some great offensive team. Like you just need some guys who can go out there and get you buckets. And there's not a guy on Tennessee that I'm like, if I needed a bucket right now, I'm like giving it to him. It probably would be Chaz, but also like he is so up and down. Like he has done a
yeah.
lot he's done a lot better towards the end of conference play. So maybe he, is gonna go on a nice little run for them, but I just don't know if I trust somebody offensively on that team. But then again, they did just have a buzzer beater a week ago.
Jemai
So
Mashak, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But at the same time, like they were down, I think it was like down 2 to Ole Miss, with like 13 seconds left. And Rick Barnes did what he tried to do in the Alabama game, and he called a timeout to draw up a play. And it was to Igor Milicic inside. And I'm like, why are we not just letting Meshack just roll with it again and see if the magic can work again? So
Yeah.
I respect Rick Barnes. I think he's a good basketball coach, but his offenses have not been very fun to watch lately.
Yeah, no, not really at all. But moving on, Florida, Kentucky in the other semifinal in this situation. Now, Florida and Kentucky, they had one of the best games of the college basketball regular season, I think, 106 to 100 back in January. Kentucky was at a little bit more full strength then. They had Jackson Robinson. Lamont Butler obviously didn't have the shoulder problems just yet. Andrew Carr, he wasn't dealing with the back problems at that point in the season yet either. But Kobe Brea, he really, more so than Jackson Robinson in that game, he was the guy that was flame throwing all day long and was the one that kind of sparked that offense to get that win back in January. So I think this has the potential to be an absolute blockbuster rematch. I don't know about you, but these two offenses, the way they get down, I would love to see this matchup happen again.
Yeah, I think it could be a super fun matchup. There's just something so special about this Florida team. It's hard to like put into words, but when you think about Florida's front court and the depth that they have there, it's so impressive. And I feel like that's something that's a little underrated about Kentucky is Amari Williams inside and their front court, is pretty decent. But Florida, like you just go down the list, you have Alex Condon, Thomas Ha, Chienlu, and Micah's healthy now too. So I really feel like whether it's Kentucky, Alabama, or somebody else on that side of the bracket that Florida ends up playing in this game, I honestly don't think that it matters. I think Florida's going to beat them. I just don't see I just don't see anybody on this side of the bracket being able to limit their front court enough to be able to overcome that on top of their guards that they they have that are solid. So unless Walter Clayton Jr. just has an off night, which we have seen happen in conference play, and even when he's had off nights, like Florida, for the most part, has still been able to overcome that. Their offensive rebounding is off the charts. It's so good. Similar to Alabama, they're a really good offensive rebounding team too, and it's just hard to overcome when there's so many second chance point opportunities for that team, and they continue to capitalize on them, and that's how they're winning games, and that's how they're blowing people out too.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Florida's destined to get to the final. Like you said, it's just something about this team. Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Richard. There's not too many trios in the country that are better than that, to be quite frank with you. And then you top it off with Alex Condon being an absolute force at the 5 spot. Ruben Chinyelu, he plays his role to an absolute T. And then you got the guys off the bench like Thomas Hall and Denzel Aberdeen. I just think that if they get a rematch against Kentucky, a shorthanded Kentucky, where guys that didn't really have much of a role the first time around are kind of forced into that, I think that maybe it favors Florida. But even if Florida were to play Alabama, I still think Florida makes it to the final, to be quite honest with you. This just feels like
Me
a
too.
team that's destined to be in the final, I think. Florida and Auburn, to me, I just feel like that's the final that we're on a crash course for. I don't know if you feel the same about Auburn the way you do with Florida, but Auburn's got a good draw up in that upper half of the bracket, and I just think that this might be the crash course of destiny that we're on for the final.
Yeah, I think if Auburn ends up facing Texas A&M, I'd be a little bit worried just because for some whatever reason, Buzz plays so well against Bruce, and it's just a mismatch for us, honestly. So outside of that, yeah, I think we have a good shot. Auburn has a good shot at making the finals against Florida, and it would be a rematch of the SEC tournament championship from last year.
Yeah, that's true. I will note as well that Mr. Blake Smith, he told me before he left for his prior obligations when we record this video, he was rolling with the Cats to take this whole tournament. You heard him say that, Brandie.
I did. I
Yeah.
witnessed this.
Yeah, I don't
we
know.
can both attest that Blake picked Kentucky
Yep.
to win, not just make it to the finals, to win the
Yeah,
SEC tournament. So
Blake Smith's SEC tournament champion is the Kentucky Wildcats. Before we dive into Luke and Brandie and the rest of the Full Court Trap podcast's championship here, so Auburn and Florida. We said this feels like the matchup that's destined to happen. What do we think ends up happening? Obviously, we know Florida went into the jungle, took care of business back in February, and this rematch, I think this has a chance to be one of the best college basketball games we've seen all season long.
yeah, I gotta go with Florida.
Hmm.
They came into the jungle and they played Auburn the best any team has played Auburn all season long. Like the entire season, that Florida win over Auburn to me is the toughest matchup Auburn had all season, and they just played us like a fiddle. And it comes back to offensive rebounding, and honestly, almost all of Auburn's losses outside of Duke, like, are to teams that are good on the offensive glass. Texas A&M is the best offensive rebounding team in the country, and Alabama and Florida, I think, are both top 15 in offensive rebounding, something like that. And that's just our kryptonite. And the book is out on how to beat Auburn, and it's attack the glass on the offensive end. And I don't know if Auburn just gives up and lets teams kind of get those second chance points, but it's been tough to watch from when we have faced those kind of teams. And I just really worry about the health of this Auburn team right now. And Denver Jones is still playing injured. It was very obvious on Saturday when he's like limping on one side of the floor. And Jedi Broom is still playing injured. They said that his shoulder had a sublation against Texas A&M again. And it's both of his shoulders now this season that have been hurt twice on both of them, on top of his ankle injury. He's very clearly different since his ankle injury. He had a great game against Alabama on Saturday, one of the best of his career, quite honestly. And so I just worry a little bit about health for Auburn, and just the matchup on the glass. If this team can really lock in and find a way to get better at rebounding on that end of the floor, then I think that Auburn can go home with the trophy from this tournament. But that's something that has to get fixed, and it has to get fixed quick before the tournament. So
Yeah, you mentioned it's a rematch of last year's championship, and we know who won it the first time around, but this time I got to go with the Gators. I'm sorry, Brandie. I think Florida gets it
Yeah,
done. I
I do
just like
too. So
this team. They're playing better than just about anybody in the country right now. Now, this doesn't say anything to me about Auburn. If Auburn makes this championship and loses to Florida, I mean, no shame in that. I think Auburn still gets the number one overall seed if that's the overall outcome of the tournament. They make it this far. But Florida, I mean, where do we think they end up on the one seed line if they were to go through and run the table and win this thing? We know the committee, it's kind of iffy on whether or not they really do value these conference tournaments, but I feel like if they go out and do this, pending what Duke and Houston do, maybe there's a case for them being the number two overall one seed. I might be crazy, but that's just when you take into account that they've played in the gauntlet that is the SEC, and then you look at Duke and what they played in the ACC. Even if Duke wins the ACC tournament, if Florida goes out and wins the SEC tournament, I think there's no debate over who the number two overall seed should be behind Auburn if Auburn were to make it this far.
I would agree that's what should happen. I don't think that's what will happen, though.
Yeah.
And I kind of been sticking to a belief that I've had for a couple of seasons now. This tournament just really after Wednesday does not matter because the Selection Sunday, where I think the SEC, it's either the SEC or Ivy League. We are either the last or second to last tournament that finishes. And after this tournament concludes, the Selection Sunday show is like a mere hours later. And at that point, like there's so much rearranging that would have to be done, in my opinion. Because you have to make sure that all of these rules are met in certain matchups in the first round and second rounds. And you have to avoid certain things. I just don't think it matters from a pure like administrative standpoint to the selection committee. So I don't think it matters at all to the selection committee, like if they win this or not. I think Florida, if they do win it, they should be, and it should matter. I just don't think that it does because it didn't matter for Auburn last year for seeding. So when Auburn went and won this tournament, it didn't bump them up a seed line, it didn't give them the best 4 seed. So I just really don't see that happening. I feel like time and time again they just prove that it doesn't matter who wins or how they win in the SEC tournament for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's always been kind of a debate whether or not they truly do put an emphasis on this tournament. But yeah, I mean, there's the bracket. Full Court Trap Podcast is crowning Florida the winner, minus Blake, who thinks Kentucky's going to get it done. But Brandie, what do we think about this product that we've delivered as a whole? I know we said we got a little bit of chaos in some spots, but hey, I mean, it's March. That's what chaos is meant to happen.
Look, we may get cooked for some of this, but this to me, out of all the Power 4 conference tournaments, has the chance to be the craziest and kind of most upset potentials per se to happen because of how deep this conference is. So I don't know. I like it. We have our Cinderella and Vanderbilt, and maybe Kentucky's a little bit of a Cinderella. You know, they are playing on Thursday this year. So
yeah. I like what we've got as a whole. The only one I'm maybe a bit iffy on is, like I said, Kentucky, Alabama. That was such a tough choice. It's just the simple fact that, like the 3 times around, can they really do it, Alabama? But I like what we've got as a whole. I think that our championship game is a pretty safe bet. And, yeah, I just like this. Another one we got to talk about, too. This South Carolina-Arkansas game, I'm going to have eyes on this because I want to see if your take ends up being spot on about the Gamecocks.
We'll see.
That one, I'm going to have some eyes on that on Wednesday because,
I think it's going to be that game and the Oklahoma-Georgia game. I think are probably going to be the 2 most fun games.
Yeah.
Oklahoma-Georgia is simply for freshman versus freshman matchup in Fears and Newell, but I think it's going to be fun, and it's the first game to start us off too. Like, let's get crazy.
Oh yeah, no, 100%. It's going to be a fun tournament. I'm really excited to see this unfold as a SEC basketball fan and just a college basketball fan in general. It's not going to get much better than this when it comes to the conference tournaments. But yeah, that's it. We've covered all of the major conferences. We've delivered all of our predictions. Go check out all of our videos. And Florida, we think they're taking home the SEC. We'll see how this adds up at the end of the week.